Oh, we are here in the beautiful Yakima River Canyon. One of the best grasshopper fishing rivers in the country, in my opinion. Not the easiest fishing, but we just get these beautiful rainbows, and we catch them right tight to the shoreline. Beautiful, love that. That is a ton of fun. Hopper fishing is one of my absolute favorite things. Just the way the fish rises to that hopper. It doesn't seem like it's the same every time. That was a really slow, yawning style rise. I had all the time in the world to watch it. But sometimes they just smash it right after it hits. Sometimes they peel off and they follow it downstream. They do all sorts of different things for that hopper. But one thing is true, every single time it is super exciting. So in this video, I'm gonna share with you all of my favorite hopper hacks. A lot of them are gonna be from a boat because our river here is really unique. As you can see, it runs high and bank full even during the summertime, providing extraordinary habitat for the trout to move right in against the shore to hunt for terrestrials. But I'm gonna run through all of my favorite hacks, a few of my favorite patterns, and I'm gonna show you what I do in order to get those fish up to the surface and on my hopper consistently. The core philosophy of everything I'm going to teach you today is that we want to show the trout the origin of its prey. Grasshoppers come from the shore. That's one of the things that's so fun and so cool about them. They live up here on the bank, and maybe they wind up because a deer spooks them, or an angler, or a little gust of wind, or a fat one gets greedy and kind of eats his way to his own demise and falls in the water. The thing about grasshoppers, though, is they don't just float along for miles. They struggle, swim, and fight claw tooth and nail to get back to the bank because they know the water's dangerous. So these long drifts where you just cast out and you mend and mend and mend, and maybe you're floating it near the shoreline, that's not gonna get nearly the results if you can show the fish that this fly fell in, walked in, crawled in, splashed in, came in dramatically, and is floating right along these blades of grass. You're gonna have an exponentially greater results if we can show the fish that the fly actually impacted and hit the water. So those long drifts where you're proud of yourself because you got a 40-foot float and you mended, that's not gonna get the results that you're probably after if you're watching this video here today. Hoppers don't float for miles. One of several things happens. One, they crawl back to the shore. 2, they get eaten. 3, they just sink and they're no longer a dry fly in the dry fly game. So follow along, check out these tips, but that is the idea. We want to sell the idea that this hopper is splashing, falling, twitching, moving, and struggling to get back onto the shore. And that's what you're going to do as the anglers. You're going to imitate that. This tip is really used primarily from a drift boat where we're quick firing shots into really tough pockets where we have to bring the cast in from above. You can't just drift the fly into a lot of these pockets because the fish are in that layer of current that's protected from the main seams. I call this a slap reach, and it's a lot like it sounds. We're gonna slap the fly down and we're gonna bring it into a reach cast. Just like that, my slack line pivots upstream. And so my fly is able to take off into an immediate slack or drag-free drift. So I fire the fly in, fly slaps down and hits first, and I can parachute my line upstream so that fly can hold a really nice drift. It's a very short, powerful casting stroke. You're gonna have to practice this one in advance, but this is like, if you wanna become an extremely good or elite hopper angler, you're gonna wanna fire that fly in, let it smack down. Hoppers have mass to them, and I can actually do my follow-up mends without really disrupting the drift or bringing the fly away from the bank. But we're gonna fire that fly in, it's gonna pivot upstream, and that big heavy hopper is gonna make a nice splash. It's gonna make rings when it hits. We're gonna be able to attract the fish, and we're gonna attack those tougher pockets from above. Anybody can just drift a fly along the shore. That's easy. To get the really mature fish that are a little bit more selective, a little harder to yank out of there, we need to attack from above, and that fly has to land and immediately fish. That little slap reach move is good. Right, it could be called there. Now, I've got a couple of options. One, I can try to land my fly just an inch or two from the bank to make it look as natural as possible. Or I can actually lay my fly up in that green grass and I can pull it out using my line hand rather than a rod twitch. If my fly hits in the grass and I twitch it with my rod's gonna load up and my fly is gonna come shooting halfway back to me or several feet off the bank, no chance of a trout. I much prefer this other hack where I lay my fly right in the grass, just like that, and I lower my rod and I draw my line hand down, and that fly just walks right off of that grass into the water. It's an amazing hack. Most people's instinct is something like this. I hit the grass and then they yank it out with the rod tip. The fly jumps several feet away from the bank. Far less trout. That's my favorite way to fish a hopper when I'm walking up a grassy bank. I lay it in the grass like so, using my line hand and my rod low. That fly just walked right in. Beautiful presentation. That's going to result in a lot of trout by day's end if I continue to do that technique. Hopper patterns. These things are so much fun. There's probably a whole bunch right under the video to shop on the online store at Reds. We have tons of different hopper patterns. But more importantly, you want just a few different styles of hoppers, more so than just different patterns. When I say different styles, there are certain hoppers that are foam based, like this guy right here, that provide a really nice natural silhouette. They bob around and they look great and they fish very, very well. But sometimes these trout, for whatever reason, they just want something with feathers and fibers and hair and hackles. Especially on sunny days, I find classic patterns like a Dave's hopper like that to work really well. Or this really special one right here called a stacker hopper that we also sell at Red's Fly Shop. I just feel like the way that the sunlight on certain days comes down through the bugs emulates motion and makes it glow, and the trout really respond well to it. So have some foam flies, have a few natural flies. That's very, very important. And the other thing is, don't rule out some of the ones that we think look crazy, like a pink hopper. Here's my theory on some of the crazy colors like pink or peach, is when you shine a light down through an insect, it's translucent and it has a tendency to light up and glow a little bit. So I do feel like some of the pink hoppers or the peach hoppers, we may think they look completely artificial. I don't think they do to the trout, because there are some days and some times that colors like pink and peach work incredibly well. But you should have a variety of different hoppers. I myself really enjoy fishing ones that look just like a real hopper. You could probably, and you can, catch fish during a hopper hatch on crazy bugs like chubby Chernobyls or flies that have legs and wings and junk coming out all over the place. My personal preference is I love to match the hatch. I love to make that fly look and act real. That's part of the joy of fly fishing that I have. So when it comes to selecting hoppers, I really like the hopper patterns that I can immediately identify with my eye as a hopper, because if they look like a hopper to me, they probably look like a hopper to the trout. If you can get this cast, or at least a cast with a really, really tight loop, you can have a huge advantage, because you can start to poke into all those tough spots to get to. Like under this tree right here is a really great example. So there's good shade under there, and a fly that just drifts in from way in outer space doesn't look as real as one I can slide right up in there. And I've talked about this cast before. It's essentially a controlled tailing loop where my fly comes in underneath my loop. A traditional casting loop, the fly comes in up above and slaps down, which means it's going to be higher up in the air, more likely to catch in the trees. This, I'm going to slide it in. It's going to be kind of an underhanded cast. You can practice this in your yard at home. That's the best way to learn this stuff. But I want you to see how high my rod tip is finishing, okay? That's really critical. My rod tip is way up here, and my fly is gonna scoot in, and my fly is literally gonna create somewhat of a rooster tail as it skips in underneath that tree. But it's gonna be a concave rod stroke. My rod tip's gonna start here, it's gonna go under tension and bend, and it's gonna come down, and then as it straightens, it's gonna come up, and the fly is gonna follow that path. So my fly is gonna go in, it's gonna race along the water, and then it's gonna aerialize a little bit and then settle down at the end. That's a skip cast. Very important for sliding that fly into all those tough to reach spots underneath. You really should consider learning the non-slip mono loop knot if you want to get serious about your hopper fishing. It's a loop knot that I feel gives the hopper a lot more freedom of movement and action, because it is a bug that is going to move, it's going to struggle, it's going to waddle, it's going to kick, it's going to fight its way back to the bank, and that loop knot really allows it to pivot and move, especially if you're using heavier tippet. The other thing about the loop knot is I think that the fish get hooked up better. They come and grab it, and they can turn and they can take that fly right there with them. So I believe your hookup to strike ratio is going to be increased when you use that non-slip mono loop knot. There are a ton of videos that will teach you how to tie that. We're not going to do that on today's hopper video. In order to become a good or elite hopper fisherman, we're going to need to have some type of reach cast. Now, as I'm walking up this bank, these hoppers and the trout are sharing habitat all in against the brush and the bank like this. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw a very short, aggressive stroke right here, and I'm gonna have a crisp stop at the rod tip. And that's gonna allow my fly to poke back into that habitat. So I'm gonna throw a tight loop, and my rod stops very abruptly, and my fly shoots in. I've got to mend, and I'm making my leader and my fly line less visible. Only the fly is being essentially poked into the bank. The key to this is good line speed, a fast action rod, and a real crisp stop, so that my fly is poking in there in a mended fashion, and I'm able to probe back into all that good habitat just like that. Crisp stop. If you're sitting at your desk, I don't care where you're sitting right now, you can practice that. Imagine flicking paint off a paintbrush. You have to have that crisp stop in order to get that hopper to turn and make that mended foot motion. It's also called an overpowered curve. There are lots of names for it. I just call it hopper fishing when I need to poke that fly right back into the bank. Rod selection. You can catch fish on hoppers from anything from a 2-weight to a 7-weight, for crying out loud. But a 5-weight is really gonna be your standard. A fast action 4-weight that's 8 to 8.5 feet long would be kind of a starting point for an ideal hopper rod for me, all the way up to the 9-foot 5-weight. Anything right in that range is gonna be excellent. I love a fast action rod for hopper fishing. It allows me to do all that tricky little stuff where I need to slice my fly in and put little hooks and little English on it, or skip my fly in, or really fire a hopper with velocity way back into those difficult spots that we have here in the Yakima Canyon a little bit. I've got a 9-foot 5-weight Sage R8, great fast action rod, does all the short stuff, does all the long stuff. And then I've got a Beulah Platinum Generation 2 series that's just a beautiful rod. I've not reviewed the Platinum actually, which is my favorite Beulah rod. I did the guide series already, so I need to get around to review. But this is absolutely one of my favorite rods. This is a 488. So this one is better for my short game, for tucking into those tiny little spots. But anything in that standard range is gonna work. But if you're looking for a rod that's gonna get the job done, look for a very crisp rod, 9 feet or under, preferably coming in about 8.5 feet. An 8.5 foot 4, 8.5 foot 5, and a fast action rod is gonna be your most accurate rod at sub 40-foot distances. Now, we've worked upstream, now we're gonna work downstream. Sometimes we need to do that when we're hopper fishing. And this is like a core dry fly fundamental, but it's especially critical with hoppers. When I'm working downstream, it's important that I stop my rod high, and that hopper can slap the water and immediately go into a slack drift. Fish are attracted to that fly falling in, and if I throw it in and I mend it or I start feeding line, I'm liable to disrupt the drift and really disturb the piece. The trout aren't gonna respond very well to that. So when you're working downstream, I want you to practice this. You're gonna just do a nice stop parachute. Look where my rod is. My rod lowering provides immediate slack line to that drift, so that hopper can just slap and drift. The fish are gonna see it when it hits the water. They're gonna be interested, but again, if you mend or feed line or do anything like that, you're probably gonna put them off. So it's a parachute cast. I'm gonna stop, there's slack built in. I can lower my rod. I can even take a step or two downstream as I'm getting that nice drift. And that works really good in big open pools when the fish is no doubt gonna see each fly land. We wanna give it immediate drift. So it works something like this when you're working downstream. We stop with the rod high, built-in slack, perfect drift instantly after impact to the fly. Tapered leaders. At the beginning of the day of hopper fishing, it's a really good idea to have a nice fresh tapered leader rather than limping along that knotted up old piece of garbage that's probably on your line right now. A nice fresh tapered leader is going to unfurl beautifully. It's going to hurl that wind resistant hopper into all those tough spots and get right in there against the bank. And with a nice new knotless tapered leader, in the event I was to lose a fly, which I do lose one once in a while, it's gonna probably break right at the fly, right at the knot where I tie it on, so I can bring my leader in and I can take maybe a fly out of my hat, or if I got one in a convenient spot, I can just tie it right back on with no tippet splicing. My preferred leader is a 7.5 foot 3X. I think it's a nice happy medium of having a short enough leader to really oomph that fly over and get it into those tough spots with speed and energy, which is really critical with delivering a hopper. We do want to bring it to the water with some velocity. Materials. When it comes to leader materials, it's no secret in modern fly fishing that fluorocarbon is a less visible material. It doesn't possess those fiber optic qualities that cause a nylon leader to shine. And we're often fishing hoppers in these sunny environments. One thing I found, if I'm getting a lot of refusals and a lot of fish that are very wary and not really striking with positive conviction, is I use a little piece of fluorocarbon tippet on the end. Why just a little piece? Fluorocarbon sinks. So what happens if I have a lot of fluorocarbon, it's going to get way down there deep, and then I'm going to go to twitch my fly or mend it. It'll sink my fly and pull it underwater, which can work, but not my preferred strategy. So I'll use 8 to 12 inches of fluorocarbon tippet right there, right up to my bug. It's not enough to make my bug sink. I like to keep it right around my neck. I'm hopper fishing today, and I've got my 3X tippet there for my standard repairs. And then if I need to get sneaky, which I am now, it's been very selective fish this afternoon, I'll use a little piece of 4X right there on the end of my leader. Twitching a grasshopper can be extremely effective when done right. There are a couple of situations I like to twitch grasshoppers. One is in lieu of a mend. So rather than me throw my fly in here and I throw a traditional mend, which might make a big V wake and some really unnatural motion on the fly, I can give it a little tiny scoot, and then I can lower the rod and relax it and let it go to drag free. I can give it a little scoot and then lower the rod and relax it. So rather than have this constant V-shaped wake coming off the fly and that subtle drag, which all these mature trout in a public river like this know that's fake, unless they're extremely hungry and aggressive, in which case you'll catch them anyway. They know that the ones that make the V-wakes bite back when they bite them. So what we can do with the twitch is we can throw our fly in and say I'm trying to hold on to a drift and I need to induce a strike real soon because I'm going to lose the drift completely. I'm going to give it a little rattle and I can lower the rod to relax it. I can give it a little rattle and I can give it a little rattle and I can lower that rod. And rather than having one constant V-wake, I can give it some nice round rings that look like a hopper struggling and trying to swim, but then it immediately goes slack. That's when the fish will be triggered and come up and bite, is right when you let it go slack. We're trying to create round rings. The other time I like to move my fly is going to be when I'm fishing more open water. There won't always be good holding water against the bank. Sometimes I'm going to be fishing open pools or a drift where I simply have to let the fly run for a ways off the bank. In order for my fly to get noticed and show those fish it's real, I'll give it a little twitch, same thing, and then I'll relax. I'll give it a little scoot and then relax and give it a little scoot and relax. It's really important that we understand that we're going to rattle the rod tip, and that's going to constantly make tension slack, tension slack, tension slack, and that's going to make the fly look like it's struggling, it's waddling, it's moving. What we don't do when we twitch grasshoppers is physically strip with our hands, because there's no way to return slack to that bug afterwards. It looks really phony. It doesn't work nearly as well, in my experience, as a nice rattling rod twitch that generates oscillations down the line where it's tension slack, tension slack, tension slack. 10 times in 10 seconds, you can get a nice little waddle or a twitch out of that. So practice that. You can even practice it at home. It's just a good twitch like that. Use that flexibility of the rod and throw those nice oscillations down that line to get that thing twitching. We're here at the Yakima Canyon. I got one of my sons rowing the boat here for this, and I'm just gonna throw a head cam on and I'm gonna show you like a minute of what it's like to hopper fish here in the Yakima Canyon. Not sure if we'll get a fish or not. I'm just gonna give you like a little sampling of what it's like to do a float here. And you may better appreciate some of the little hacks and techniques that I'm gonna teach you about casting and presentation. So we're gonna hit this bank, let's go. So here we go, we're trying to get every little nook and cranny on this bank. And getting the fly in there a lot of times isn't the hardest part, but holding that drift is tough. But we have tons of habitat along that bank. Sticks, logs, rocks, fresh green grass. You know you're gonna have fish laying under that green grass. Little twitch right there, little twitch, little twitch. And our fish will live in pretty shallow water at times. That's where a lot of the food is. And lots of overhanging trees to slide or skip that fly under. That's a skip cast. We'll teach you how to do that. And we still have a little bit of mid-river structure too. We'll fish the seam out here. Fish that seam. But what I'm really looking at is right there. There's water running under that grass. So I'm gonna reach out and touch that dark water right under there. And we're gonna end up pretty close with the boat, so the water sucks us in, so I'll duck down just a little bit. But those are the kind of spots you're really looking for when you see black water under the grass. Those are the zones. But a good caster's gotta be able to go from long to short and short to long. And anytime you're in the shade, don't do any harsh mends or anything, but these fish are under that bank. We really have to fire it in there. My flies are rubbing up against those blades of grass. Right there. Ooh, made a popping sound, my fly, that's bad. When you go to pick your fly up, you gotta do it more gradually than I just did. That was a mistake. So slow pick up, attack the shadow. Give it a little tiny twitch. So it's kind of dragging a little bit there, so I'm hiding the drag by twitching it a little bit. I'm kind of disguising the drag on that fly a little bit. And anytime, it's pretty skinny, but anytime we get water running under that, okay, my fly's in the grass, I'm gonna draw it in by stripping the line, just like that. That fly just walked right off the blade of grass. That's one of the tips we're gonna share with you today as well.